In this video, I'd like to continue the building of our Reversi application. I assume that you've already looked at our prototyping video, so you know where we're heading. And in this chunk, what I want to do is help you build the static web server that's going to be used to serve our application. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a component that exists in the cloud on the Heroku system, and that is going to be an application that's running JavaScript, and it's a kind of JavaScript that runs as a server, and so that kind of system can be run using a package called Node.js. That's going to be the software that answers our requests for web pages, and then on our computer side, we're going to have a client that makes that request to our server for us, and that client is just going to be a web browser. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do in order to get this going is to make sure that we have Node.js installed in our own machine. Node.js can be found from nodejs.org. What you're going to do is you're going to download this, and it's going to provide some software on your machine so that you can run Node from a command line to get our environment set up. If you're on that's good for a Windows machine. If you're on a Macintosh machine, you're probably going to want to use something like Homebrew. Homebrew is a package manager that you run from a command line as well. I already have that installed on my system, and it's pretty straightforward to set up. So if you do have it set up, you'll need to open a command line window, a terminal utility somewhere. And for me, what I can do is I can run brew install node, which will install Node.js on my local machine. And it should already be installed, so this should be quick, I hope. Node, when you get it, has two different pieces of software that we're interested in, which is Node, the software that runs JavaScript, and then NPM, which is the Node package manager, which will help bring libraries in for the JavaScript that we're interested in. The other thing while we're waiting for this to be updated is we need to make sure that we have a place on our hard drive where we want to put our software. And so this is going to be a Git repository, so be thinking about where on your hard drive you want to put those files. All right, so I have Node installed and I have Node NPM, or I have Node installed, so let's just verify that I have NPM installed. Again, brew is only going to work on a Mac. If you have it installed, you should be able to do something like node version and npm.version in order to get everything to work. Okay, so that's our first bit about how we're going to get our software installed. You should have Node and npm installed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to GitHub and we're going to create a new project for our for this software. So I've been prototyping it on GitHub, but I'll go ahead and start a new one so that we can see it from start to finish. Go ahead and log in on your account, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository with the little plus button here. And I'm going to call it Reversi for mine, and that looks good. And this is a web application version of Reversi. Spell check of the game Reversi, and let me do it. All right, I'll go ahead and I'm going to make it a private repository, and then I'm going to also ask for it to be initialized with a git ignore file, which is just helpful, based on a Node project, which is what we're going to be building. So let's find Node and go ahead and create that repository. All right. And so that's given us a file that we can, a repository from which we can work. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new window in SourceTree. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new repository on my local hard. I'm going to clone this repository, bring it from the cloud where it is right now in GitHub, and store it in my local machine. And so, okay, now I'm going to open up SourceTree, and I'm going to create a new repository to hold the files that I just created on GitHub. So I'm going to choose new repository, and I'm going to clone from URL. Where am I going to get that URL? I'm going to get it from my GitHub window over here. I'm going to choose clone or download. And for me, I'm going to use the SSH version of this URL because I have that set up on my computer. You are probably going to find that using the HTTPS version is easier. So if you need to use that, select use HTTPS and grab what shows up there instead. Go ahead and put this in source URL, and then you need to find a location on your hard drive where you're going to store the files so that they're mirrored with what we have on the cloud. So for me, I'm going to use a file. I'm going to use a place on my hard drive that I've set up for this. I'm going to open it up and check out the branch. Everything's good. Make sure that my URL is good. Make sure that my location is good. And I'm going to go ahead and clone that repository. And when I do that, that's going to pull all the files from my remote machine down to my local machine, from GitHub down to my local machine. If I've done that and I click on history, I should see that there's only one node in my history path here, and that demonstrates that I've only had the repository created with the git ignore file, and there's the git ignore file from the first commit. Now I'm going to go to my command line, and I'm going to navigate my way to the location on my hard drive where I stored the files, and that is going to be, for me, it might be different for you, but it's going to be in a file called git reversi. And if I look at all the files in this directory, I can see that the .gitignore file is there, and that's great. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this directory ready to be used as a node application. And so to do that, I'm going to run the npm command, and I'm going to run npm init. And that's going to set up the basic structure in my directory so that I can run a node server. And it's going to ask me a couple questions. First, it asks me the name. And so for the name of this, I'm just going to say it's Reversi. It's version 1.0.0 because I haven't done anything yet. I'm going to give it a description. This is the game of Reversi. The entry point is going to be index.html actually. Index.json. It's going to be server.js. Because what we want Heroku to do is we want Heroku to launch and run our server, and then our server is going to deliver files for us. So it should be server.js. No test command. My Git repository is the same one that I just used, but I'll use the URL for it, and that should come up automatically. Keywords, you can put whatever you want in there. And again, with authors, you can put your own name there if you'd like. License, I'm going to use GPL 3.0. And then it's going to create a little JSON file for me that it's going to store in my directory as a package.json file. Looks good to me. And now if I look at the files in my directory, you can see what npm init did for me. Created that package.json file. Great. Now the next thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that there are 2 libraries installed that we're going to use. We're going to do that also with npm. I'm going to do the command npm install, and then the first library's name is socket.io, and the second library's name is node-static, but I'll just do one at a time. Socket.io, and then I'm going to add --save at the end. What that --save is going to do is after I install this library, it's going to record that I need it in my package.json file so that Heroku can read that file and identify the fact that it also needs to get that library in order to run our server on the cloud. If all goes well, you'll see a lot of processing going on, and then it should install okay. And now I'm going to run npm install node-static-save. That's going to download a library that's going to help us to run a static file web server and save that as well. If I look at my directory, now I have an additional directory that's been created called node modules. And in node modules, I have a bunch of files that are where those libraries are located. All right, the next thing that I need to do is I need to create a file that is going to give instructions to Heroku about how to run my application. And to do that, I need to create a file called procfile. Procfile is another setup file that we need, and I'm going to edit it here in my directory, but you can use any text editor that you've got in order to create such a file. Capital P ROCFILE. And then in that file, let's get it down here. I'm going to write web:/node:/server.js. This file is going to give Heroku instructions on how to launch our application. And so it says for our web server, what you should do is you should run the node program using server.js as our file. So I'm going to save that, and now in my directory I can see that I have got the proc file there as well. So we've got package.json, we've got the node libraries we need, we've got proc file ready to go. Now let's go ahead and create a new application on Heroku, and we can link Heroku to GitHub so that we can see what it is that we're running here. All right, so leave GitHub for a moment and go to Heroku. And once we're logged in, what we're going to need to do is create a new application. Our new application is going to be what runs our Reversi game. So I'm going to go ahead and call it Reversi, and I'll put my initials on it just so I don't collide with any of your applications. And I'll add a -version 1 on it. You can use whatever you want if it's available. And we'll create that application. And we want to link it to GitHub. So we're going to click on GitHub in order to link it. And we're going to search for Reversi in my GitHub account. There's the one that I want. We'll set it up. And we'll keep that handy for the time being. All right, so that has now linked our Heroku application to our GitHub account, and our GitHub account is connected to our hard drive. So now on our hard drive, what we need to do is we need to edit a file that we need to actually create the server file. So let's do that. Let's do that next. All right, so now let's hide source tree for a second so that we can see the file I'm working on. And I'm now in my directory with the files in it, and I'm going to need to edit a new file, and it's going to be called server.js. And what we're going to do is we're going to put JavaScript in there. So I'm going to bring up a file that I can work with, and I'm going to hide my terminal window. Give it a second to settle out. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to include our static web server, our static file web server library. So I'm going to put a comment in here and say include static file web server library. And then you can put a comment in here if you want to help remind yourself what you're doing. Now I'm going to create a variable called static using the keyword var, and I'm going to call it static just because I want to remember the name. Var is required, and static can be any name you pick. And I'm going to require the library node-static to be included. Then I'm going to include the web server library, the one that receives requests from the internet. So I'm going to include the HTTP server library. And again, I'm going to create a variable using the keyword var, create a variable name called HTTP, and say that I'm going to require HTTP to be present in order for my application to run. There's a slight complexity here because sometimes when we're testing our application, we would like to be able to run our server on our local machine before we send it all the way out into the cloud. And so to do that, we're going to need to put a little bit of logic into our code here to recognize whether our server is running locally or on Heroku. So to do that, I'm going to first assume that we are running on Heroku and set the appropriate parameters for that. So if we're running on Heroku, then the port that our server is going to be listening on is going to be stored in a variable called process.env.port, so the port. And that's process.env port is provided by the Heroku environment if it's running on Heroku. And then if we're running on Heroku, then the directory from which we want to get our files is going to be we're going to create a variable to store that called directory. We're going to set that equal to 2 underscores dirname plus single quote / public single quote semicolon. That's just giving a path on the file system where our files that we're going to be delivering to the web browser are going to be located. Okay, so now we're going to check to see whether or not that worked. We're going to say if we aren't on Heroku, then we need to readjust the port and directory information. And we know that because port won't be set. If we're not running on Heroku, then that process environment port variable won't work out. So we'll check. We'll use this command. We'll say if type of port is undefined. So 2 equal signs and undefined in double quotes. Or port is null. That we're going to do that by 2 vertical bars, an exclamation mark in port, and then a curly bracket. And if that's the case, and we'll indent here, we'll say our directory name instead is going to be set to single quote period / public. So we'll have less of a file path that we're going to be tracking down in order to get there. Oops, make sure I get my spelling right there. And my port is not going to be equal to what it was there. I'm going to set it equal to 8080. So if I'm running on my local machine, I'll have to add the port to my URL if I want to see the files that are there. And then to close out that if statement, I'll add another curly bracket. All right, so now we want to set up a static web server that will deliver files from the file system. And to do that, we're going to create a variable called file, and we're going to use that to construct a new, my editor catch up here, oops, too many equals, a new static server that's serving files from the directory that we just figured out. All right, that's good. And now we have, so that's now something that will serve files from our hard drive. Now we need to connect that to the network connections coming in. So we're going to construct an HTTP server that gets files from the file server. All right, and that's going to be our app. So we'll say our variable app is going to equal our HTTP variable, and we're going to create a server by doing period create server. Make sure you get a capital S on that, and an open parenthesis, and we're going to pass it a function. And that function is going to answer all the requests that come in from the internet. It has one parameter called request and another called response. Make sure you get the E on there, make sure you spell it right. And then within the body of that function, we're going to have our request.add capital L listener, and we're going to give it a single quote end, single quote, comma, and we're going to give that a function as well with no parameters and a curly bracket. And we're going to say, when you get a request, please serve the file that's associated with the request that you got. So if someone asks for index.html, we're going to give them the version of index.html that's located in the public directory, because that's where our directory got set to when we created this. And then finally, we'll put our close curly bracket and response, open close, semicolon, go back to line up with, sorry, not response, that should be resume. Make sure I get that right. Resume. And it should not be there. It should be lined up with the request, and it should have a smooth parenthesis. Resume. Okay, good. Then we'll put a curly bracket that lines up with our function, and then lastly we'll put a smooth parenthesis that lines up with our create HTTP request. I'm going to indent it a little bit. The indentations are just for readability. They're not required in JavaScript. And we'll listen on a port. And that should be good. All right, so I'm going to save that, and that will be our basic web server that we're going to use this time around. So if all goes well, I should be able to close that, save that file, and go back to our terminal window and look and see what's in there. Now I can see my server file is there. And if I run this locally by typing node server.js, I shouldn't get any errors. That's one thing. No errors. You know what? I don't actually know whether it's running or not. So I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to open it up again in my browser, and I'm going to add one more line to the bottom of that once everything settles out here. All right, and the line I'm going to add to it at the end is going to be console.log. And I'm going to give it a single quote. I'm going to say the server is running. Single quote, smooth parenthesis, and semicolon. Close it. And then if I bring my server back up, now when I run node server.js, I see the server is running and everything's good. All right, now I'm not quite ready to check it out in my local machine yet because I don't have a directory from which I'm going to be serving my files. So I'm going to create a directory, and you should create one too using your file manager. And it's got to be called public, so that after I look at my directory, I have a public directory there. Now I'm going to go into my public directory, and I'm going to edit a file called index.html. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the template code from Bootstrap and put it in there. So let me open up index.html. And while we wait for that to show up, I'm going to go to Bootstrap version 4. And I'm going to go to find the sample code for that. Here's my starter template. And I'm just going to copy it to my clipboard. Go to index.html. And paste it in there. Where it says hello world, I'm going to add this as Reversi just to make sure I know that things are working when I get it to work. I'm going to close it. Close it and save it. And now back in my directory, I can see that I am in the public directory and index.html is there. So I'm going to go up one directory and I'm going to run my server. It's running. And so now if I open up a new tab on my local machine, I can type localhost 8080/index.html, and this is going to connect to the node server running on my local machine. It's then going to deliver to my browser the index.html file that's also on my local machine. And it didn't connect because I had some kind of problem here in my code. So what I saw is when I tried to connect from my browser, that caused the nodes, the server.js to crash. And I can see when I read this line here, it says there's a problem on line 28 and it had something to do with file.server. So let me take a look at that and see what we got. And if I look at line 28, I see that I called the file.server command. Oh, and I'm sorry, that should be file.serve, not server. I'm going to save that. And try it again. Node server.js, run my local server. I'll load up localhost :8080/index.html. And there we go. Great. So what's happening now is that I've got a server running on my local machine, and my browser is connecting to the server on my local machine using localhost :8080/index.html. When I execute that command, the browser talks to the server.js file that's running here. Server.js looks for that file in the public directory. If it finds it there, it delivers it back to the browser, and then you can see that I've got my file up and running. It's great, but now what I want to do is I want to deploy that onto Heroku. So I'm going to clear out my file here, and I am going to get source tree back up. And we can see now that we've made a bunch of changes on our hard drive. We have a new set of uncommitted changes. If I highlight the uncommitted changes there, I can see all the files that have changed under unstaged. And because it's a purple with question mark, that means that those files aren't present. So there's no changes, just the files are completely new. So it consists of the package.json file, the proc file, the server.js file, and the public/index file. I want all of those to be moved from stage. I'm going to commit them to my repository. So I'm just going to say, here is the static file web server. You can put whatever message you want in here. The details of this is just for you to keep track of things. I'm going to commit that, and that's going to bundle up all those files into my history on my local machine, and I'm going to push that out to GitHub. You should see the same URL that you downloaded and cloned here, I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to show the output just to make sure I don't see any errors there. All right, so now it's been successfully connected to GitHub. And now if I go back to Heroku and I go to my, let's see, and now I want to say enable automatic deploys. And what this is going to do is anytime that I upload things to GitHub, it will automatically refresh my application. So I'm going to enable automatic deploys. I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to look at activity. Nope, what do I want? I want to see the logs, but let's see, where is that? No activity. Somewhere there's a set of logs. Forget where it is. Resources. Oh, overview. Huh, I was looking at it earlier, and now for the life of me I can't find it. Somewhere here there's the possibility to look at log files to see how it's doing when it deploys. And now that I'm recording, I just can't see it. Let's see. Okay, well, it's not critical, but I'm going to go ahead and open my application. This is my new app, and if I add onto the end of it /index.html, and all goes well, I should see what I expect to see. I don't see it, so I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go to my deploy button, and I'm going to manually deploy, tell it to sync up automatically. Here we go. Here's the logs. That's what I was looking for. And now you can watch it, watch Heroku grab it from GitHub and make sure that everything works okay here. If it works okay, it should launch, and then you should see Node start to run. Looks like Node ran there when it got the dependencies. And now let's try it. That's my local machine. Here's my new app. Add index.html to it. Great. So now you can see that I'm running it from the cloud. Okay, so that's kind of the summary of what we wanted to do. What we've done here is we have made a new application and we've stored it on GitHub. We've downloaded it and cloned it using SourceTree. We connected it to Heroku here, and we can now look at our application either on the web, or we can look at the application locally on our hard drive if we're running the Node server at the same time. The Node server is still running. I'm going to cancel it by hitting Control-C on my computer, so that now if I reload the browser, the local host, it won't work. All right, so this is the base from which we want to work, and this is how we're going to get the next stage of our application running. So your goal is to get this far, and if you want to, you can build up the look and feel of the index.html file, but I'm going to save that for another video. Thank you for your attention.